wonderful talk, Building Developer Value in a Digital Distribution World. Jon, most recently contributor and editor to the acclaimed book Crowdfunding Bible, and he's a game industry expert, author, instructor, strategic advisor, and consultant to many companies for over 15 years now. But without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Jon so he can tell you all about his most topic.
Great, thank you very much. So I wanted to talk a little bit today about, as we transition from retail to digital distribution, how that's changing how acquirers and publishers and funders think about what a company's worth, and how you as a developer, to the extent you care, want to think about that in terms of how you think about your business. So just for me to understand who all is in the room, how many people are working on a product to be digitally distributed? Some? How many have already shipped a digitally distributed product? Nobody? One, two, okay. Anybody working on a retail product still? So everybody here is thinking digital. So great. So I think where we are now is probably one of the best times that we've been in the game space since I've been in it, for an independent company to actually develop and distribute a game. You might not realize that when you see all the people getting laid off in Vancouver, but it's a really great time to get your product out into the market. But one of the things you want to think about is where, so you've made a product, you're building a company, where are you building value in that company? And ultimately you want to sell it, or have somebody acquire it. What are they going to be looking at when they think about the value of the company? So, what are some of the things that are valuable in a company that people look at and used to look at and still look at? So there's obviously intellectual property, there's code and technology that you might build, there's cash in the bank that you have, there's revenue from those existing intellectual properties, there's staff and people, there's know-how. The team may know how to do certain things other teams don't know how to do. And then there's physical stuff, computers and networks and chairs and desks and a building and things like that. But there's other things, and those are sort of how people traditionally thought about what comprised the value of a company, and there's things like goodwill and some other things. But basically, the value of your enterprise was the intellectual property and the revenue that you derived from it. And that's changing a little bit as we think about digital distribution. And one way to sort of think about and approach, what is my enterprise worth, is to sort of look at it from the perspective of a publisher. So when a publisher looks at you and says, what are you worth? What want to make part of our family? What do they look at? And that requires that you crawl into the mind of a publisher and think the way they think, and that's kind of a scary thing. Miner's helmet and boots, scary place. But I used to work for a publisher for many years, and I did evaluation of acquisitions, and I did a bunch of acquisitions. And so I think I know what they look for, both then and now. And you got to understand that they're also in the middle of this transition from retail to digital, and it's a big change for how they think about their business. No longer are they thinking about, so much of how they thought about their business was large capital investment and risk associated with that. So I'm going to work with a developer to develop a product, and it's going to cost me $15 million, and I'm going to spend another $15 million on marketing, and I want to mitigate the risk involved in that. And so how do I do that? Now they're thinking about things like MAUs and ARPUs and coefficients of virality, and a lot of things having to do with who is using their game and the data they can collect around those consumers. And that's a really different way of thinking about the business, and that filters down eventually to how they look at any given company and their desirability to their enterprise. So what do publishers look at? What they're looking at right now primarily is not so much intellectual property. So for a long time, your value as a company was the game you made and how great a game it was and how many people bought it at retail, how much they paid for it. And that's still important. That hasn't gone away. But the metric that people are using to measure your desirability is people, is community. And you can see that in the way that they approach their contracts then versus now. So, I'm not giving away any secrets here, but in the past, publisher was going to try to own your intellectual property, and if they invested money in its creation, they were absolutely going to try to own your intellectual property. They were going to want to own the sequel rights, the derivative works rights. They wanted to control what platforms it was going to be published on, and they were going to control the marketing, and their brand was going to be primary, and yours was going to be subservient to theirs, and they were going to try to get as much as they could out of you in terms of royalty. So if you look at a publishing contract now for, say, working with a publisher for mobile or working for a publisher for digital distribution on PC, it looks a little bit different. They may be looking more at, so that you get a contract back from them, and intellectual property, they don't care. They're going to let you keep it. If they invest a lot in it, they're going to want to own it or own a percentage of it or rev share on it. But if it's something that you've funded and created, they're going to let you own it. That's a huge mind shift. So intellectual property, they might let you have that. Sequel rights are nice to have. They like to have sequel rights, but it's negotiable. Marketing is no longer we're going to control everything. Now it's how do we work collaboratively. So we want to do a bunch of marketing and messaging for the product that we're going to publish with you. But if you want to go out and do some of that, that's okay as long as we coordinate and understand. And issues of whose brand gets shown when become negotiable. But what their big ask is now is for integrate our SDK. And that is not negotiable because they want to have access to the customer. They want to have access to customer data, what they're buying, when they're buying, how much they're paying for it, when they churn out, their activation and their retention. And that is the thing that they ask for. That is there, and they're asking for it now. They didn't ask for it then, and it's not negotiable. So that's the thing that they see as the value. And if you look at all these publishers and what they're trying to do, we've seen a diminution of publishers over the past couple of years, especially on the console side. But just in the past year or so, we're seeing this rise of new publishers that you've never heard of, and people who are calling themselves publishers who before had nothing to do with publishing, really. So, in addition to new entrants like Zynga and Platinum, of course, which is owned by Disney, Crowdstar, and some others, you have folks like Amazon, who is now a publisher. They don't make a big deal out of it, but they're out there doing publisher-y kind of stuff. GameStop, a retailer, is now calling themselves a publisher. GameFly is calling themselves a publisher. They're doing publishing on iOS and Android. Tapjoy, an ad network, also is a publisher. They have a fund specifically to fund that activity. And then you even have marketing companies like Reverb, does PR and marketing. Well, they're also a publisher. You want a slot on Xbox, they'll find a way to get you a slot. All these guys are calling themselves publishers. And part of that is because the barriers to entry of becoming a publisher now are so much lower. You don't need to invest large sums of capital in the development in conjunction with the developer or with an internal team. You just go and say, local science says I'm a publisher, and I'm going to help you bring your products to market. And why are they doing this? Why is EA building Origin? Why are all of these companies out there building this infrastructure so that they can aggregate people into networks around their games? It's because they believe, based on partly what's been happening in casual games and on Facebook, that that is the way the world is going to work going forward. That ultimately people's behavior is going to be able to be collected as data, and that has value. We can calculate the lifetime value of a customer, how long they reside in our network, and that is where the value is. And that the key battleground going forward between whether it's Microsoft or Sony or Apple or Amazon or Valve or another is about who's going to own the primary relationship with the customer. So does the customer have a relationship with EA, with Microsoft, with whoever, independent developer, Bungie? And all of the deals that they're going to do in terms of publishing are going to be quantifying how I as a publisher relate to that customer versus you as a developer relate to that customer versus the platform provider, an Apple or Microsoft or Sony or whoever. So, when you think about your value as a developer, the thing that a lot of people I don't think enough about, especially if they're coming from a traditional retail console mentality, is the value of your community. really what this boils down to is all these publishers are looking at the community that you bring to the party as a developer for your game. And if it's a pre-existing intellectual property, then there's a pre-existing community, and they're going to understand how they can quantify that. That is absolutely how people think in the free-to-play space, but it's even creeping back into the sort of non-free-to-play space, paid downloads. If you want to publish a paid download mobile game, you're still going to have to integrate XYZ's company's SDK, and they're going to use that SDK to manage their existing community and their population of users back and forth between your app and all of the other apps that they have. And when they think about your desirability as an acquisition target, they're going to be looking at what is the population of people who are playing your game, how much information do you have about them, how long do they stay in your game, and they're going to calculate the lifetime value of the customer and then try to back into what's the value of the company based on that. So that's 10 in or 10 left?
10.
Okay. So when you're building your company and when you're thinking about what your core competencies are going to be, traditionally we thought about engineering's core competency, you have to be able to technically make a great game. Design's core competency, you have to be able to design a great game that's fun, people want to engage in. Think about community as a core competency. How I'm going to build a community, how I'm going to retain a community, and how I'm going to obtain it. You can look at a game or a game that can be completed like the banner size. If you look at Kickstarter, lots of people up there are pitching games on Kickstarter. But one of the things that they can use Kickstarter for is market validation and to build a community. So the Banner Saga, new intellectual property, nobody's heard of these guys, Stoic Studios, they've been working on the MMO, the Star Wars MMO previously. They ran a Kickstarter campaign successfully. Now they have $750,000, and more importantly, cash is important, but also as important, or not, if not more important, they have 20,000 users who are invested evangelists for their product. That when it's actually done and they launch it, all 20,000 of those people will be out on social networks, out on their forums, out telling their friends to check this game out, because they've already put money down on it. That is one example. It's not the only example, but that's one example of community building activity prior to release. There's more traditional, PR and marketing and viral and guerrilla and just, engaging with your buddy at Kotaku. Anything that you can do to build your community in advance of the release of your product and then grow it over time. Think about that as a core competency for your studio, because that community that you build is how you're going to be valued, at least for the foreseeable future, until things change. They will probably change as we get more and more hardcore players into, especially into the mobile space, into an area called mid-core. Mid-core is not developed yet. So that's a really quick, brief overview. Questions, comments, emotional outbursts. Did that make sense? Was that confusing? Say something, please. Show signs of life.
That made complete sense.
Okay.
Talking about the value of draw something when it was bought for $220 million. I was thinking that the value was in the 30 million users they had, not really the game.
Well, values in the users they had, and the value was also in what they were doing to Zynga's perception as being the kingmaker and leader of Facebook when OMG Pop was suddenly had the #1 game on there while Zynga's trying to IPO. So that's kind of an intangible thing where you see that happen on a Thursday, and on a Friday you go, okay, tell me what your number is, because I gotta, you're fucking killing me. I mean, it was bad. So yeah, they wrote a big check, and will it ever earn out for them? Not so sure. But hey, it got them past their IPO, and I think they're pretty happy with where they're at. Other questions?
That was an outburst.
Cool. Unless there's any other questions, then I think we're done. If you guys need to get a hold of me, I can give you my email address, or you can just grab me afterwards or whatever.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you all for coming.